Hi, Jeremy here, Modern Vitality. In today's video, people with long haulers syndrome are lucky. There, I said it. It's counterintuitive. This may even be an offensive statement to some people, but I'm going to put it out there, right? It's okay if this is a little controversial. When I first heard this idea, I opposed it too. But I'll tell you, after sitting down and meditating on this, it's really pretty impressive how we can zoom out with the right perspective, the right mindset, and understanding this piece of how lucky you are right now, even if you don't feel lucky, even if you feel exhausted, you got weird pains, you got brain fog, you're scared about your health and your future. No doctor seems to understand what's going on with you, right? All this stuff, actually, when you zoom out, we're going to see that having the right mindset around this will significantly influence your healing path and your odds of getting through it. It's very important. All right, let's get started. These kinds of reframes are really massive in terms of our healing potential. And what you need to understand is that healing is not just mental. I know some people, they go after this, oh, it's the power of the mind and the subconscious mind, and I'm going to manifest health and all this kind of stuff, which is good. It's great. I do not discount that. In fact, that's some of the stuff, if you're at all familiar with my work, you've probably heard me advocate this, like the way we think about things is very important. And at the same time, it's not enough, right? For most people. I know there are some people who have healed themselves with their mind and all that, but this is the vast minority of people. Most people that I meet, that I encounter, that come into my world here, they've tried some of that stuff. They maybe get some results, but they feel like, there's more to it. And there is, right? There is. What I'm going to tell you, this is not just a mental thing, but the mental piece is important. And in terms of making progress with your healing, you want to make sure that you don't have your foot on your brake. Okay, because we can add all the gas we want, but if our foot's on the brake the whole time, we're not going to go very fast. And sometimes these belief systems act like a foot on the brake, meaning having negative thoughts, negative emotions around resentment and guilt and shame and anger and all. It's natural as a human being to go through this, right? But we want to start to go through those emotions as quickly as we can and process them pretty cleanly so we can show up to heal with an open and curious mind, okay? Because then your foot is off the brake. And the things you're doing can work a little bit better. Same thing, skepticism, right? It's good to have a healthy sense of skepticism. I know I do, right? But you don't want to have skepticism to the point where you're just totally jaded and just you think nothing will work, right? You need to have some optimism underneath as well. So all that's to say, when we look at a topic like this, like feeling lucky for having a disease, it's really interesting because this isn't just lip service. Right? In the short term, it doesn't make any sense. And I remember one of my mentors, she was a dear, dear teacher to me. And this was, early 2000s. I had this conversation with one of my teachers. And she said, and she was talking about any kind of chronic complex condition. She said that people with these diseases, they're lucky. They're very lucky. And I immediately was like, you're full of it. I was like, you're just trying to make people feel better, or you're just talking crazy just to stand. I was like, why are you saying this? It doesn't make any sense to me, right? Of course, I was in my early 20s, and I would like to say that my worldview wasn't very evolved yet back then as it could have been, right? So I know I've made strides in the way I think about things too as I've matured, right? But I was kind of younger, and I personally, I wasn't that developed in my early 20s. I was having a hard time with longer term thinking, but conversations like this kind of snap me out of it. So she said, yeah, people are lucky with these conditions. I said, okay, can you explain that? I don't understand what you're saying. And she broke it down so that even I could understand back then. And she said, well, listen, what's happening now is their system is more sensitive, right? Your body is more sensitive, and little things are having big effects on you. So you may have a condition, a medical disease diagnosis, or even if sometimes they just suspect something, or there's just enough stuff that's kind of not right that makes you think something's going on, right? Whether it's officially diagnosed or not. And you have all these symptoms, and you're very almost hyper reactive to what's going on with the world around you in terms of foods, emotions, situations, environmental things, right? All this stuff can really have a big effect on your system. But what that does, and her point too, is she said people who get these conditions at a young age are the most lucky. And I was like, you're killing me here, right? How does this make sense? And she said, because what that does is it forces you to pay attention to things other people are numb to, right? So normal people that don't have any kind of disease diagnosis, they're still affected by the environment, right? They're still affected by the foods they eat, by their emotions, but they have no warnings, right? There's no lights flashing on their internal dashboard telling them to pay attention to something. So they're going to go through life with a false sense of security. All these things have been undermining the health of normal people for 10 years, 20 years, 40 years, 50 years, whatever. And they have no idea that their health is eroding because they're not sensitive enough. They're not tuned in enough to feel it, right? So eventually it just bottoms out, and then you get really sick and you don't know why, and it doesn't make any sense. And there's no proactive care. And her point was, people that have these conditions, these complex chronic conditions, they have no choice but to start to pay attention to self-care. And what that does over time is that starts to build up habits and systems in your life, right? This is one of the things I work with all the people that come through my group, my programs. I'm always building up systems of self-care so that you have these things and you don't have to think about them and reinvent the wheel all the time, right? But when you put those systems into place, now you're setting up a foundation so that, yes, life is going to be trying to hurt us, right? There's going to be weather problems. There's going to be pathogens. There's stuff in the environment, right? There's mold spores everywhere. There's foods that aren't perfect. There's all these modern insults. It's one of the reasons I call this modern vitality, is to have vitality in the modern world is quite a feat. It's quite a challenge with all the stuff in the sky, in the soil, on the food, in the air, right? All these things that are manufactured that are now assaulting us all the time. And more people are becoming sensitive, right? Because there's no choice. There's no choice. There's so many bombardments happening that now, like, a lot of people are starting to feel it. But if you're even more on the kind of hypersensitive side of the spectrum, then you've had a lot of practice with this. And this is one of the things I've noticed too from working with all the complex chronic health condition folks, is that the communities are very savvy to things. So when the average population is starting to get subjected to electromagnetic radiation, right? Non-native EMFs coming in from rollouts and all this stuff that nobody asked for, right? And now people are starting to get sick. Well, the complex chronic health folks, they already know it. They already saw it coming. They're already monitoring their EMF levels. They're already doing shielding, right? They're already doing all these things to mitigate and minimize those types of effects. And likewise for basically every other issue that's happening. So if you're dealing with something complex and chronic, something baffling, even if you've got a wild symptom picture, I will tell you, I think there is some truth to that. You're lucky because you've been forced to prepare, even though it doesn't feel like luck at first, or even right now, right? It might not feel like a blessing, feels like a curse. But what that's doing, if you embrace that, if you dive into that, is it's forcing you to pay attention to some things that nobody else is paying attention to. And what that allows you to do is prepare and learn and start to become more resilient and more strong. And then when the bottom drops out of the normal people and nobody knows what to do, there you are, and you can help and you can guide and you can lead and you can serve people that way and you can share what you've learned. Pretty wild when you think about it. When you think about what's your bigger kind of life calling, right? Now, this doesn't mean that we need to suffer, right? Always suffer, because that's where all the value is. But what we can do is we can find value in the suffering we've had, as long as we can use it and extract it, right? Not just suffering for suffering's sake, not just having pain with no purpose, but instead looking at, what are these lessons I've extracted? What wisdom have I gained from this experience, even though it's been unpleasant? And you'll find, actually, when you look and you zoom out, you're going to find that you know a lot of things that most people have no idea about. And that's an extreme strength. And it's going to become very, very valuable as the modern world gets more and more toxic, basically, right? You know things that are extremely important. People already are probably starting to ask you about things that they didn't used to ask you about, because they know that you know that stuff, and it's becoming very, very relevant. So that's one piece. Now, the other thing that I've noticed, the second piece of why it's lucky, is because once you start to get, just as my teacher said all those years ago, once you start to get forced to pay attention to your body and develop self-care practices and all that, if you can organize your care in the right way, and this is something I've had to develop because even my teacher back then didn't have this laid out so cleanly, right? But if you can learn how to go through the stages of healing, immune system, digestive, neuroadrenal, blood circulation, then after that, we have boosting like mitochondria and hormones and all that kind of stuff, if needed, biohacking, all those things, right? That lives there. It's not your first move. Okay. Start with the immune system. Usually most people do best with that. If you do that, if you follow a process like that, you can go from being sick, right? Oh, I don't feel good. I'm exhausted. I've got weird pains. I've got brain fog. I'm bed bound, all this stuff. You can go from that. Seriously, you can dig your way out of that pit. And when you get to the other side, you don't just stop at normal, right? You dig your way up, and you don't just stop at normal. You actually have momentum, and you keep going. And this is the wild thing. This is really wild, because so many times when I say this, I sound crazy if you're in the pit, right? But I've seen it happen enough to know that there's the potential for you to dig yourself out of the pit of not feeling good. And when you come out the other side, you're actually stronger than the average person. You have more vitality, you have more energy than the average person who's been settling for the numb status quo because they don't have pain. They don't have pain to prompt them, right? To motivate them into actually learning how to really take care of themselves. This is wild. When I watch people who are, a lot of times it's not always women, but a lot of times this kind of archetype happens where the mother or the matriarch or the female kind of head of household, right? She's taking care of everybody else. And then she hits a point where she kind of can't anymore because of, burnout of her systems. So exhaustion, like I said, exhaustion, fatigue, brain fog, weird pains, all this stuff kind of piles up. Yeah, sure, there's typically some kind of medical condition involved, right? But basically like, oh, I'm sick now. I can't take care of people how I used to. And then all of a sudden it changes and everybody else is not taking care of her, which feels weird because she's not used to that, right? And then everybody kind of sees her as, even though they don't say it, they see her as like the weakest person in the family who needs the most accommodation, right? And oftentimes the patient will feel that and they don't like how that feels because they're especially used to being like the strong one that kind of pulls through for everybody else. But of course, that's the pattern, right? You pulled through for everybody else and didn't start taking care of yourself until it got that bad. And I know I'm going off here, and once that happens, right? Oh, all of a sudden, status-wise, ability-wise, you're kind of like the weakest one in the household. But you start working through a system, right? Actually getting your health back in a strategic way. And now you start to get healthier than you were before when everything was fine and normal, right? You're healthier than that. And then you actually become the strongest person in your house. It's a crazy transformation because now you can actually go back to giving and taking care of the other people, but it doesn't deplete you. It feeds you because you have that vitality, because you've got an underlying system set up of self-care, basically. And your software is updated to where you know how to read what your body needs, where we've taken your intuition and we've now trained it. You have a trained intuition that you can trust, you can depend on. It's fascinating to be a part of that transformation. So if you're dealing with a complex chronic health condition and you don't want to do it alone, there's a lovely community of people, which I started. It's called Modern Vitality Solutions and Support. It's a free group to join as a guest. You'll find the link in the description below. If I see your application and it looks really good, like you're going to be a great fit for our group, I'll get you in as soon as we can. Now, my caveat here is that I keep it small. Why do I keep the group small? Because you can ask me anything in there. And I like to know who's in there. I like to know who I'm talking to. So if you ask me for my perspective on something, I can give you information that's more tailored to your specific situation, right? So I like to know what's going on. That means I keep the group cozy and we do tend to fill up. So you may find there's a wait. If your application looks really good, it might be a month, right? It might be 2 months before I can get you in the group. But again, it's free to join. And in the meantime, consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, right? Why should you do this? Well, because now you're taking charge over these algorithms. If you see something that helps you, right? And if you're dealing with a complex chronic health condition, getting your health back is probably the biggest thing on your plate. It should be your first priority, right? That's what's blocking you up from the whole rest of anything else you want to do. So if you see something that helps you along with something very important to you, and you start subscribing and liking and all that, you're signaling to the algorithm you want to see more things like that because they actually matter to you, right? I know we all go on social media for a little bit of escapism and some kind of scrolling and whatever random stuff and funny things and all that, which is fine. But at the same time, if you train these algorithms to show you things that help you, you can get a lot smarter, a lot faster. So I would encourage that. All right, I hope this video helps you. Let's get you feeling better. Cheers.